This question from Anna Ray. Hey DF, exclamation point. As somebody who loves many 40 FPS modes on PS5 games, I've been wondering about the best methods to replicate that on PC. I find that many frame rate limiters have poor frame pacing when trying to do a locked 40 FPS. What would you suggest? Thanks for all the amazing content. I adore the new DF InDirect.
Yeah, so Anna Ray, this one's a little bit, since there's not a lot of context provided by your question, I'm just curious if you're running VRR or not. Because I would definitely recommend actually doing that if it's possible on your 120 hertz screen. You can get VRR and then turn that on at 120 hertz and then lock down the frame rate using something like Special K actually would be a pretty good idea. And then you'll get the benefits of essentially 40 hertz or 40 FPS in a 120 hertz container without the negatives of having to be stuck to VSync. Because VSync, if you drop a frame, you're going to get judder and it's going to jump, it's going to increase the frame time dramatically to like what is it there? 33.3 milliseconds at that point. And you're going to see the judder and all these other issues. And you will also then avoid the fact that most frame pacing issues occur due to VSync's existence. If you're on a VRR display, the minor tiny little differences in each frame time won't manifest as the frame being late or being too early for the next VSync window. So you won't get the 8.3 millisecond short frames and then the log frames. You wouldn't get that in a VRR display. So I heavily recommend using VRR and then 40 hertz with something like Special K. But if you don't have a VRR display, the best way to get 40 hertz is to use, if you have an NVIDIA GPU, is to use the VSync available in the driver. It's in the current driver, and it's also in the MV app, I'm pretty sure now.
Profile expensive. Inspector.
It's also in Profile Inspector too, where you can there change the VSync option to 1/4 refresh at that. No, sorry, 1/3 refresh at that part.
Yeah.
And then you'll get a 40 hertz experience and you can, with NVIDIA Profile Inspector 2 or the inspector, you can also change whether or not when it drops a frame at that 40 FPS, whether or not it'll tear. And that's a separate option there. And you can play with that if you wish. I kind of prefer the judder in comparison to the tear option just because I find tearing more obvious for some reason for myself. But that's one thing you can do and I highly recommend it. But if you are on a VRR display, I'd be surprised you're seeing any sort of frame pacing issues. So I'd be wondering what the issue is.
It all depends really on what the VRR window is, I guess, of the display, because a lot of them are like 48 to 120, in which case you're probably going to have to use the VSync options that you talked about. But some have low frame rate compensation, obviously, which should basically just let you set 40 FPS or whatever you like as your frame rate target. And you shouldn't really have to worry about anything beyond that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, we discussed this in a recent Direct, the concept of frame rate caps and whether the games should have them on PC. Mm-hmm. I do think there is value there, particularly if you have like lower end kit, because sometimes you could get these wildly varying frame times depending on whether, for example, if you look at the Sky, your frame rate suddenly goes up to 120 frames per second. It just kind of feels a bit weird to me. So yeah, there are numerous ways to achieve 40 FPS or whatever FPS you want, really. I guess when I'm playing on a sort of mid-range kit, I would probably be targeting like, the comfortable low end of what it's capable of for the most consistent experience. Mm-hmm. And, that can be 40, it can be 45, it can be 48. I think for me, it's not so much the question of, 40 or bust, but the whole consistency of the whole experience.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's basically the way I would tackle this one. But yeah, Special K has, if you don't have an NVIDIA GPU, Special K can also do things like special VSync modes that do, for example, like 1/3 refresh.
Right.
So your 120 becomes 40. So yeah, I guess if you're on NVIDIA, the NV app or the control panel or NVIDIA Inspector are pretty good places to look. Elsewhere, Special K has got like this bewilderingly impressive range of frame rate capping options, including like I think they call it latent sync, which is basically VSync off, but they're limiting the flip of one frame to the next during a display refresh period. So you shouldn't actually see the tear. But lots of options. I honestly think VRR, going back to the question we had earlier, actually, about the benefits of the PC platform, VRR is just there.
Yeah, it's
on virtually all monitors that have been made recently, with the exception of some laptops. And it is just so valuable in getting like a consistent experience, or just not having to worry so much about firmly adhering to a specific frame rate target. It's kind of gold dust, I think.
yeah, it's great.
Yeah.